All right, peace, everybody. Black people need to start having more children. Our population is being obliterated. We are being exterminated. We might actually go extinct. You know, if you calculate the massive amounts of abortions that black women keep having, the massive amounts of prisons. Black men that are in prison who are incapable of reproducing because they're locked up, separated. Basically, modern day apartheid, which required that the man and woman in South Africa be separated. The United States is doing it with prison. And a large amount of homosexuals in the black community, both men and women. This is contributing to a massive shortage of people to benefit and to take advantage of all of these resources that's in America. You see the Caucasian people, especially the Irish, they are from another country. They are like implants. Now, when you implant yourself, even when you say, for instance, you implant an organ into a body, you must use so-called anti-rejection drugs in order for your body to not reject that organ. You got to keep taking these drugs forever. The same is for when you implant a people into another country. You see, the reason black people always have been abundant is because we have a vast gene pool from all over the country. We're not just isolated a particular small bucket of genes. Like, you have a small gene pool, and you keep reciprocating those genes over and over and over. Eventually, those genes will deteriorate, and you won't be able to reproduce. But with black people, so-called, they call us black people. We are a nation that's not called black people. We have the Narragansett people, the Mississippian people, the Illinois people. We have a lot. We have a lot of people, but we are a nation of people in this country, and our gene pool is so vast and diverse that we will never be deteriorated naturally. Natural selection will not subdue black people. But what could subdue black people is if we commit suicide, genocide on ourselves by refusing to reproduce, refusing to repopulate the earth. Nature won't do it. Nature is actually our greatest ally. If we was to sit back and just wait 200 years without even doing nothing, we'll be the only people left by the process of elimination, because our gene pool is so vast. Even when you bring say for instance, you implant an African into America, right? An African male into America, or an African female into America. That particular person, if they don't have their own so-called mate, they will have to reproduce with a person in America. And eventually, their genes will be overtaken, lost in translation. In a couple of generations, that African gene will be mixed up in our gene pool. It'll be null and void. So they will have to implant massive amounts of African people into this country in order for them to actually sustain themselves genetically. That's what I'm saying. But we already have people in America, black people, so-called black people. We're in Canada, we're in Mexico, we're in the United States, the four corners of this continent. So our gene pool will never deteriorate. But when you think about so-called white people, which is European people, the proper definition of a so-called Caucasian is anybody from Europe, Eurasia, which is Eurasia, or the so-called Middle East and North Africa. So that's a massive amounts of people. And some of those people that's considered so-called Caucasians are actually black Africans. So the particular Caucasians that we actually think about when they use the term so-called white Caucasian is the European, the pale-skinned Europeans from Western Europe, which is the Irish, the British, the French, the German, or whatever. Now, each individual group in numbers in America are very small. You see, this with Joe Biden and they figured it out. They're already done. They fate is already sealed. They won't be around in 20 years. You might not have no white people here in 20 years. So what Joe Biden did and the Democrats did, which are like immigrants from Europe, Italians and Irish primarily, they decided to just bring in a bunch of Mexicans into America to replace them, to take on the mantle of white supremacy, to be our oppressors in the future. They're training the Mexicans in all aspects of building, construction. They're putting them in Congress. Even in the Senate in California, Kamala Harris' seat went to a Latino. So they're preparing a Latino to be the next Caucasian people, to be the next white supremacists. You know, they actually put the so-called Mexicans above the Asians because the Asian population is very small in America. So they're never they're on the way, they're on a decline in America just like every other small group of people. But what makes the Mexican group of people so threatening is because they're literally part of America. You have millions of them that could just walk over here and replenish their gene pool. You see, in Europe, they will have to implant most of their country. Their country's already small in Europe. You know, in order for them to replenish themselves in America, they will have to bring their entire country to America. And then a lot of them got murdered off and killed off in the Spanish flu. A lot of white people died in the Spanish flu. And then you had the Civil War. A lot of them died. So their gene pool is dwindling on life support. You know, it's out of there. So in order for so-called black people to be victorious in the end, because it's all a race towards the future, all the so-called black people have to do is just keep reproducing. And what Trump did with his tax bill, with his tax breaks, his tax cuts, he actually giving people with children a reward. I think you get $3,000 per child in credit. So this is a benefit to this is like encouraging more people to have more and more kids, because this is the key to victory for the so-called black people, is to just keep having all of these kids. Like a black man should have at least 12 children. Every so-called black man should have at least 12 children. And they should have at least 3 or 4 different so-called baby mamas. Because in America, they don't have so-called polygamy. You have to go to the Middle East to actually have more wives, but we need to just keep repopulating the earth in order to actually secure the future. Because I'm not a geneticist. I didn't study genetics, but it seems to me that so-called black people, when they have children, their children get stronger and better and smarter. They're on they elevate. Black children elevate. But with other so-called groups of people, it seems like when every generation of theirs actually deviates and gets weaker and smaller. You know, it's an interesting observation. Because I see a man, small little man, his son is like 6 feet tall, 7 feet tall. So it's like our children get stronger and better than us, and wiser, and more. And it's like we elevate when we have children with so-called black people. Have to have children with other so-called black people, but they can have children with non-black people too. But it's encouraged that the so-called blacks reproduce with each other, because the children actually comes out stronger and healthy and have a clean slate. A child doesn't know anything about no white supremacy. They don't know nothing about fear, nothing. And if they don't actually have any type of training, preconceived training, that means that they could be taught the truth at the beginning without being subjected to trauma and fear that the previous generations was subjected to. And this new generation of children will be the ones to rectify and get vengeance, and will avenge our ancestors, just like the story of Osiris and Set. Set killed Osiris, chopped him up into 13 pieces. Osiris's wife searched for his pieces and found 12 of the pieces, but she couldn't find the reproductive piece. So she had to have an immaculate conception with Osiris's spirit in order to reproduce a son who was Horus. And Horus was taught by Isis. Isis taught Horus. And Horus grew up to get revenge on Set for subduing and killing his father. This is the key to our future. The children is going to be the ones that we have to have in order to come up and get vengeance and get all the things that our ancestors couldn't do, even the things that we can't do now, is going to be the next generations that's going to correct all of those things. And they start off with a blank slate, and that's a good thing. That's about it, though.